Hello, everyone. I'm Cailtin Huey-Burns in for Elaine Quijano tonight. Thank you for joining us. President Biden is heading back from Florida tonight after meeting with first responders and families of those impacted by the deadly Champlain Tower collapse. He thanked those involved in the search and rescue efforts at the Surfside condo building for their incredible work. The president recognized how firefighters have supported him in his own life, including in the 1972 car crash that killed his first wife and one-year-old daughter. He also acknowledged the grueling conditions that firefighters are facing during wildfires, extreme heat waves, and drought in the West. Here's how Biden explained the federal government's role in helping Surfside.
We cut through the bureaucracy. The one order I gave the federal folks was no bureaucracy, just cut through it, get to whatever they need. That's why we decided to cover, for example, 100% of the search and rescue cost for the first 30 days. Not done often, but necessary here, in my view. And FEMA is going to provide temporary housing and other urgent needs for the survivors. State Department is expediting visas for family members from other countries, and there are from Latin America, South America, Europe, Israel. And I want to give a special shout out to the first responders. International Association of Firefighters, one of the best organizations in the country.
Back in Washington, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is moving forward with her own select committee after failing to get support for a bipartisan commission to investigate the Capitol Hill riot. She's inviting Republicans to join her. That's despite reported threats from House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy to strip committee assignments from any Republican who takes her up on that offer. Wyoming Congresswoman Liz Cheney was already pushed out of House leadership earlier this year. This morning, she announced that she'll be joining Pelosi's committee.
Look, very clearly, as I said, that my oath and my duty is about partisanship, and I would expect that Leader McCarthy has the same view. We'll see. I think that there are many Republicans who recognize and understand the importance of getting the truth about what happened on January 6th.
And this all comes as the Trump Organization and its chief financial officer, Allen Weisselberg, are being charged in an alleged 16-year tax fraud scheme. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office is also accusing Weisselberg of personally neglecting to pay taxes on nearly $2 million in income. The 77-year-old surrendered to authorities Thursday morning. He's pleading not guilty and plans to fight the charges in court. For more, let's bring in Natalie Jennings and Heather Timmons. Natalie is Deputy Washington Editor for The Washington Post, and Heather is White House Editor at Reuters. Thank you both for being here. Heather, I want to start with you and what we saw with Biden's visit in Florida earlier today. And the images were really striking to me because here you had President Biden sitting next to Republican Governor Ron DeSantis. These are potential 2024 rivals for the presidency. But you saw them, working together. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the significance of that moment when you view it through the lens of the previous administration.
Sure, and there was a real moment there where Biden said, we found something good in all of this, and he looked at DeSantis and he said, we've shown that we can work together. And DeSantis sort of subtly nodded, and that counts as bipartisanship right now in America. It was fascinating because this is what the Biden White House has tried to do all along, to say that if we just keep marching forward in the way that presidents have always been, eventually we will coalesce everyone on our side. If we explain to them what this infrastructure thing does, eventually everyone will get on board. And we know from Washington that's not true. That's not really how politics is working right now. But it was sort of I would say a win for the Biden White House for that strategy.
Right. Striking that this is a moment of bipartisanship kind of speaks to the moments that we're in. Natalie, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy spoke to reporters after Congresswoman Liz Cheney accepted the spot on that committee to investigate the Capitol riot. He denied threatening his conference and effectively threw Cheney under the bus for her insistence on blaming former President Trump for stoking those false claims. What do we know about his threats to strip committee assignments from members if they were to join Pelosi's committee?
Well, we know that he's denying that he is making those threats, but we also know that, I guess the question for Liz Cheney is how much of that would really even matter anyway. She has clearly become persona non grata within most of the House GOP caucus. Remember, she was on his leadership team just, weeks ago. And so those threats, whether they happen or not, are sort of, outside the issue here. There is also going to be this problem where Liz Cheney is already viewed as taking a side on this. So, we don't know about who might have also not been taking those sides, that seat if they had not had such a threat hanging over them. But we know that it doesn't change much as it regards Liz Cheney herself.
Right, and there's still an open question about whether McCarthy will appoint Republicans to serve on that select committee. Natalie, what does he have to consider when deciding whether or not to cooperate with the select committee and Pelosi?
The big thing he has to consider is former President Donald Trump and what political ramifications he will threaten for members who sit on such a committee, whether he will bless any participation, whether he would, blame McCarthy for that. I think that is the major factor that we think McCarthy is considering with a lot of his decisions regarding his caucus, but this in particular because it has to do with President Trump and his supporters.
And speaking of former President Trump, Heather, I want to discuss the political fallout from the Trump Organization indictments today. Although the former president has not been charged, how does this increased legal scrutiny potentially shape his future?
Well, this is a first step in what might be a long process. They're also looking at whether or not the Trump Organization inflated real estate values for bank loans while deflating the values of the real estate for tax purposes. And are trying to put pressure on his CFO to eventually cooperate. And at some point, we're hoping that's what, at some point, that's what the DA is hoping happens, that they get some cooperation. Trump has come out and said, of course, that this is a witch hunt. It is, in a broader political context, that's what Trump is always going to say, that this is going to be a witch hunt against him. But we have a situation now where, to go back to the Biden White House, they're looking at enhanced tax enforcement as a way to pay for infrastructure and things. So whether or not people are following tax rules becomes yet another one of these sort of hyper-politicized things in America, potentially.
It's something we'll be following over the coming weeks to see what comes out of that. And Natalie, the Pew Research Center released its Validated Voters Report on Thursday. This is considered to be a more accurate measure of the electorate than we get from exit polls. Can you tell us what some of the major takeaways were?
Yeah, this is sort of a exciting moment for people who watch polls to see this, quadrennial survey come out. We saw a lot that we already know, but we saw it borne out. We saw some trends in terms of people who were already trending away from Republicans following Trump's election in 2016 kept going that way. You just showed that suburban vote. That has just kept going further and further away from Republicans following Trump's election. The other thing we saw is sort of the impact that Latino voters had. We saw more evidence of that, how they swung toward Trump in ways that we didn't think that they would that wasn't necessarily predicted, and how we saw that Democrats didn't really have a way of stemming that, even though they might have known it was coming. We also saw a slight shift toward Trump versus 2016, 2018 in terms of urban voting. So those were interesting things to watch that weren't sort of going along as they had been previously, like those suburban voters were.
Yeah, lots of interesting data in there, and I know that Republicans and Democrats are going to be looking at it very closely heading into the midterm elections. Heather, I want to talk about Vice President Kamala Harris. She has been tapped for some really big tasks, from voting rights to the root causes of migration, and some of her staffers are speaking out anonymously about working for her. In an interview with Politico, one person went as far as to call the environment abusive, saying, quote, "People are thrown under the bus from the very top. It's not a healthy environment, and people often feel mistreated." Has the vice president faced any accusations like this before?
There was, a lot during her campaign there was a lot of dissection after her campaign, particularly after her presidential campaign ended, about whether or not it had been a slightly dysfunctionally run campaign. So that's probably the echoes that you're thinking of. She very obviously has a huge amount on her plate doing two intractable issues that are sort of the issues of our time, and is the first female vice president. So she does also face just an oversized amount of scrutiny.
Well, I know it's just July 1st, but a lot of news today that we were able to cover. Natalie Jennings and Heather Timmons, thank you so much for being with us.